Hello, my name is Mandolin Royal, and today I need to find a volunteer for dinner for the flock. I have the bare minimum basic tools for just doing one single chicken. I have a bag for the bird, I have a smaller bag for the innards, I have a scale, I have a knife, and I have a clean working surface. I'm not going to be able to show you the deed itself, but I'll show you the tool that I'm going to use, and then we're going to talk about the bird we're going to be doing before and after, which will probably do a pretty good job of showing why he's going to end up in this position. Now, as far as the reason, we've got a new little rescue Yorkie dog who's benefiting from more of a raw diet, and I'm out of meat for her. So we're just going to do a one bird at a time sort of approach, and she's going to do her little bitty part on holding me to my own standards. But let me jump over to the tool that I'm going to use for dispatch, because I'm doing this by myself and without my husband today. Alright, so this is the tool I'm going to use, because I'm a big fat baby when it comes to processing birds that I actually pretty well like. This bird has a great temperament, and that makes it trickier, but it also makes me firmly believe to do my due diligence on making sure that he does not suffer, he does not see it coming, and it is over with quick, fast, and in a hurry. This I call my handy dandy neck whacker. It's a cervical dislocation device. This lever lifts up. You put the bird's head through here, and then you bring this thing down like you mean it. And I'm not going to be able to do that for community standards on a video, and I also need both hands. I support the bird over on this side with my left hand. After I have used my right hand to bring it down, I shift this hand to the feet, because there's going to be some flapping and whatnot that happens. When that happens, after I've done the deed, I drop them in the cone, and I let them work that out. It takes about up to about a minute for after dispatch throws, I guess you'd call it. But after this part, we're going to get into the bird himself. So when it comes to picking one bird that I need for meat, I have looked through all of these pens looking for the absolute worst bird in the flock. These pens all got a pass, and I have the worst bird, coincidentally, already segregated, because I rank my birds based on priority importance for their express traits, for what sort of breeding favors they're going to bring to the table. So these guys all have their reprieve. These two boys are extra. They also are reprieved. They're not the bottom rung. And it was a choice between the bird in this pen. He's actually pretty nice. And the bird that's in this pen. And this is the weakest link. So this is the bird I'm going to be processing today. I like him, but he's not able to keep his butt clean, and I would have to intervene for that. That was a knock. He is not the fleshiest bird. When we did the hands-on evaluation, it really wasn't great. And his fleshing does not carry that well down the length of the keel. And that is really important in what's going to breed forward from here. So with all the other birds that I have, and them being better in that regard, that means this is the one who's going to volunteer, even though he doesn't know that. And he's not going to know it at all. It's just going to seem like a regular thing, and then it's going to be over and done with, and it's going to be fine. Now, if he turns his back or his front to us, we'll be able to see the narrowness that is in between the legs, and that's indicative of the general lack of meat that he has. I was able to put my hands on this bird and recognize that he's really not going to bring many table traits to the breeding equation. So even though he has clean white feathers and his comb isn't totally out of control and he's feathering in pretty good and he grew pretty good, he just doesn't have that it factor that it takes to breed forward in our program. His temperament, I like it a lot, and that's what's going to make this hard. But I'm going to go ahead and do it because you have to be just a little bit ruthless when it comes to these matters. Because I know deep down this bird isn't going to do anybody else any breeding favors either. The whole point is the meat. He doesn't have it. After I get the deed done, we're going to see that without the feathers. I'm not going to scald. I'm just going to go ahead and dry pluck. It won't take too long. It's not too bad. It's not the worst chore on the farm, as it turns out, and I need a chicken to go in the crock pot today. So, enough procrastination. I've got my chores done. It's on to the part that I don't like. But the result will be worth it. And we're going to make it a little educational, too. We're going to go across the hand feel and what we're looking for without the feathers on. So hopefully some of what I've been saying makes a little bit more sense. So it took me 15 minutes to go from to the pen to this stage here. And this was a very good call, as it turns out. Look at that bend that was hiding from topical physical evaluation. I can't believe this bird got to this age. So he started out with a live weight of 6 pounds 10 ounces. We don't have a final dress weight yet because I haven't removed the inner bits yet. But this bend in the keel, it was not readily felt on the live bird. But thankfully we are dual purpose and we do process our birds and we do get to see these little details that may have missed the mark. Now, whether this was contributing to the lack of fleshing down here, I don't know. I don't have enough data to support that being the cause. All I know is that he carried all of his fleshing up here in the front and hardly anything back through here. And as it turns out, this bend in here is a major, significant terminal flaw. That means this bird needed to be in the freezer anyways. So now I'm feeling a lot better for calling a really, really good temperament. But you're gonna have that. I mean, it's really unavoidable. And I cannot express enough to prioritize your flock goals and prioritize the reasons of why you're doing this. Because case in point, great temperament, terrible table traits. You don't want to see stuff like this in a shrink bag if you can help it. And it's through breeding decisions and selective breeding that lets you steer away from stuff like that. It is not, it looks a lot more significant here than what it feels like when you run your hand up. Like when I put my hand on and I run my middle finger up that keel, it didn't feel anywhere near as off as it looks here with this bend. So this was a very good decision to do this today before this cockerel ever got a chance to be in a breeding pen with females. He is right on the money of 5 months old, right at, what is that, 20 weeks. Now, since I was hand plucking, some of the feathers were a little tedious, especially what was on the end of the wings. So I went ahead and I cut those off to make it easier. This is not a dinner bird for us. This is a dinner bird for the dogs. So I wasn't going to be too particular. Another thing that I do when I go out and I find a bird that day to process that day, I will cut the neck off. Well, first I'll cut the head off up here. And then I will find the tube that goes to the crop. And in the neck, there are 2 different tubes. You have a windpipe, which is this one. It's a lot more fibrous feeling. It has a lot of texture to it. That goes down to the lungs. The other tube that runs down the length is what goes to the crop. This is the food chute. I go ahead and I put a knot in there. If I cut it way up high, I have plenty left to tie a knot. This bird was not pulled off of feed, so that means he's got food in the digestive tract. So by tying it off, right there's my little knot, we're not going to have any leaking problems. So the next thing that I do at this point is I get my hands on them and I get familiar with feeling on the bird without the feathers, because that goes a long way to help you evaluate birds when they do still have their feathers on. If you're thinking about putting them in a breeding pen, this is really important to get really knowledgeable about, because what people want these birds for is the meat in this region. That breast meat. It's where most dual purpose varieties are lacking. Some birds may carry it up to the front and then they'll kind of fizzle out. That's what this one did. The best birds, they have the really good fleshing all the way down the length of the keel. This bird is pretty thin in the back 50%. And for me, that's a deal breaker. With the age of the bird, I am going to have to spend some time separating the crop out and peeling it back. But before I get much further, I want to talk about bone spacing. And I spend a lot of time talking about that because of how important it is. When we go to get inside of this bird and retrieve what's on the inside that needs to come on the outside, that's access through this back area here. So this right here is where the keel ends. Right here, these are the pelvic bones. So a distance that's really important to note is that distance from the end of the keel to the pelvic bones. So we'll go 1 finger, 2 finger, 3 finger, 4 fits, but it's a stretch. So he's like 3.5 fingers for that distance. For the pelvic spacing, these 2 little bones right here, we have 1 finger, and then we have 2 finger. On a cockerel, that's about right. This bird was never going to lay any eggs, so he doesn't have to have that giant opening that a female in active lay will have. A female in active lay, she's going to have practically 4 fingers, and that's what creates that larger opening to squeeze those eggs out. The male's contribution is towards the build of his daughters, so you want them to have an easy 2 fingers. If it's just a little 1 finger, that's not enough. You really want to see more than that. And you might have to work at that through breeding selection to have that come into being in your flock if it wasn't there already. You just need 1 bird that has it to use so that you can breed better birds from that bird. But this guy's an easy 3 finger distance from the keel to the pelvic bones, and he's an easy 2 fingers between those pelvic bones. So I'm not going to have any problems getting in here and retrieving what I need to retrieve. But first, because I like to get the crop out with everything else, and I like to pull it from the back side, so I'm going to go ahead and find that tube that I had made a knot in, and I'm going to keep separating the tissue. Mostly it's separating from the skin is where it's attached. And it's going to create a little bag of sorts separate. And once you've got it peeled away towards that opening where the body cavity begins up here, it's going to make my life easier when I get to the other side. Some people will cut them out. If the birds were off feed, that's pretty easy. You're not going to have any problems with leaking. But if the bird was not pulled off feed, you're going to get a leak. Now, if we're going into the back end, there's a couple different ways you can go about it. And I prefer to actually start from the top side and take the tail off too. But this bird is also for dogs, and I'm not worried about the aesthetic look. So there's a couple of pin feathers in here still. We'll just go ahead and call that bonus protein. Maybe a little extra keratin once it cooks down. But I'm going to grab right here, right under and right behind the keel. I'm going to lift that up. And I'm going to put my knife straight in. This knife is not the sharpest one, as it turns out, but I'm not going to walk to the house for another. I'll continue that cut down to one side of the vent, and I'll use my left hand to move the poop chute. It looks like, because this bird had food in the system, this bird might poop, might not. So I cut across the top of the vent, shift that poo track, cut downward on the other side. Now this bird also did not have special finishing. It didn't get any special treatment at all, really, besides the daily care, because I didn't really anticipate doing this today. But the need expressed, and so the need will be met. There was that poop I was talking about, and I don't have a hose to spray this off, so I'll just shift operations. I've got to separate where the testes tie in, I guess we'll say. But now that I have that lower intestine separated, I'll give it a little pull and gain some distance from the gross bits. And then my hand goes in, and I do a scooping motion to separate. With this bird being 5 months old, that means everything has had a chance to start tightening from the hormonal influence. His wattles were a little crooked, I noticed. One was a little bit longer than the other. So I'm a little curious on how that's going to affect testicular size. That has a significant impact on their temperament. With this guy being really mild, I kind of wonder, what is that size going to translate to? Once I have everything separated and loosened, just kind of swirl your hand around, and thanks to that back end spacing, look how easy. We're not wanting for space inside the body capacity of this bird. Next, I'm going to intentionally find the gizzard because it's attached to that crop that I loosened in the front. I'm going to get a hand around it. Gizzard feels a little small, really. I'm going to apply pressure and gently pull, and hopefully I get it all in one piece. Ooh, and I did. I love it when that works out favorably. The only thing I'm interested in keeping for the dog is the gizzard. And that does, for the age of the bird, that feels small. I wonder if that was a contributing factor to his lack of fleshing. Next, I'm just going to go back in and retrieve out everything else. One testicle, average size. Trying to get the liver all in one piece. We'll see. There's the heart and the liver. We'll set that aside. Those are both keeper items. The other testicle. So now I want to see if they're the same size. One testicle is slightly smaller than the other. Both functional, both healthy, but I'm starting to wonder if there is a correlation between how level the wattles are and how level the testicles are. He did have one short wattle, and he does have one slightly undersized testicle. Interesting. I will not be frying those in bacon grease later. I'll probably just feed those to the pigs. Next, I'm going for the lungs. They're in between the rib bones, and you got to do a little digging for them, which is another reason why you want the back end spacing to be ample so that you have workspace. There's a lung, nice and healthy. Go to the other side, scoop a finger in between the ribs. Like this, my hand is way up here right now. Way up there, in between the ribs. They do make a tool that you can get for removing lungs. I don't need it. There's some kidney that is against the spine in this region here. Since this bird is going for dog food, I'm not too worried about getting all the kidney out. And usually it comes out in pieces, so we'll just leave that there. But I am spending time inside with my hands, feeling, especially feeling for the impact on this bend in the keel and how that has affected the interior of the bird. This is all really important stuff when you want to nerd out on breeding for those utility production traits, especially with an eye on the table result. The only possible impact I feel is thinness. The back 50% is just not that well fleshed. This bird wasn't going to do anyone any breeding favors, but he's got a lot to offer for a meal for a super cute little rescue dog, and I am a-okay with avoiding having this persist in my flock. I thought I was pretty well past it, but there it is. Some more work to be done. It's not a big deal. Just keep eating them. The problems will fix themselves through the power of selection. Breeding selection and making sure you're not using birds like this, that's the most important part. But let me go ahead and get this bagged up, brought to the house, cleaned up, move on with my day. So more on this later as I find reasons to call a bird. I will definitely fill you in on why and a little bit on how. Maybe you picked up a new trick today, such as getting the crop out from the backside as one piece. No leakage. So more on this later. Feel free to like and subscribe. We're even going to get gross, just like this. I forgot to get the dress weight. We'll go ahead and do that real quick. And I also want to open up the gizzard and see what was in there for grit. It was undersized, but I have more questions. I did put the neck back inside the bag. We're at 4 pounds, 13 ounces. Respectable. For a 5-month-old purebred bird, that's not too bad. But maybe you've never opened up a gizzard before, and I really think you should. It can be very enlightening. Find the center, cut it open, and split it open. I'm gonna want this for the puppy. No grit. He had access and he wasn't eating it. Jesus. So the other thing you want to do with the gizzards, because you can eat these too. I personally don't, but you can. You've got to peel them. There's a very thick, resiliently thick lining on the inside. You just peel that off. So this is the part I'm keeping for the pupper. This is the lining that was on the inside. And I'm actually pretty disappointed at the lack of grit inside of this crop. But that's going to vary from individual bird to individual bird. And sometimes I've found some really weird stuff inside of the gizzards too. Everything from broken glass to whatever other odds and ends they find to serve as grit. But grit is something really important to provide to them to make sure that they're getting their peak digestibility. But still, for the age and size of bird, this was pretty small. So that's another good reason he ended up in this position. So I'm going to go ahead and take him into the house and get the cooking started, because I've got that hungry, a little old lady dog who's going to be very happy to have this. Now, okay. More on this later.